Alrighty, I might get us underway for today, although I don't expect us to take the full hour unless you've got a whole heap of questions for me, but we'll see how we go anyway. Thank you everyone for joining us for the second edition of what we're calling our CIGRE Australia Next Generation Network Technical Essentials webinars. This is a series of webinars where instead of going to the nth degree and to the very nitty-gritty detail of a topic as presented by a subject matter expert, instead we're looking to introduce some of those more technical topics for those that maybe are new to the industry or are not familiar with that topic and are looking to understand a bit more about it. So today you're joined by myself, Adrian Lloyd. I am the Technical Program Lead of Strategy and Emerging Opportunities at Yurika, which is part of the Energy Queensland Group. And I'll be presenting today on, or introducing, I guess, Frequency Control Ancillary Services, or FCAS, as I'll refer to it frequently throughout the presentation, but specifically around batteries, because that's where my experience has come from, and that's what I'm able to share and introduce for you today. For those of you who are joining us who are not CIGRE NGN members already, which is probably a small few, if you like today's presentation and you want to get more involved in the NGN, you want to become a member, there's a QR code there on the right. Please do scan that and follow the prompts. NGN membership is free if you are already a CIGRE member, whether individually or as a collective. If you're a student, for instance, CIGRE membership itself is free. But I'll harp on a bit about that at the end as well. Just some housekeeping. Please do remain muted throughout today's presentation unless you are needing to ask a question or provide a comment. However, the preference is that you do submit your questions via the Q&A section in Teams, and I'll look to address those at the end. Any questions that I can't answer or I need to take on notice, I'll seek to get back to you following today's session. Today's session is being recorded. How we'll post that up and those things will follow afterwards. We do have a YouTube page, which the intent would be for this to go up onto. Cool. Before we get underway, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we all gather today. I think we are being joined naturally today, so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands on where you're gathered today. But here in Brisbane, I gather on the land of the Turrbal and the CIGRE people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and recognise their continuing connections to land, waters and country. Just briefly, a little bit about me and where I come from. So as I mentioned, I work for Yurika, which is part of the Energy Queensland Group, alongside the distribution entities of Energex and Ergon Energy Network. We also have a retail business as Ergon Energy Retail, which services the majority of regional and remote Queensland customers. I also happen to be the co-chair of CIGRE Australia NGN alongside Natasha De Silva, who is my co-chair in that for that committee. So I guess I'm wearing two hats today. On a technical front, I'll be talking about topics and experiences that I've had as the technical program lead and as an electrical engineer within EQL and Yurika. But I'm also heavily invested in the outcomes of CIGRE NGN. And so if you do have questions about that, I'd happily take those today as well. So a little bit more about where I come from and my background and the business I work for, being Yurika. We are the commercial arm of Energy Queensland, so we operate as a completely separate private business, but within the environment or the group of Energy Queensland. A focus of our work is around energy and infrastructure, particularly large-scale renewable connections, wind farms, solar farms, and large batteries. We also do offer energy supply services where we provide, utilising our warehousing, provide an on-sell service of energy infrastructure. We have a metering business, a telecommunications business, and we do a few other things in between. Where I fit into in this argument, in this story, is actually as in the services division. So I sit in what's called strategy and emerging opportunities, and I support all these business lines where there's strategic initiatives or through investigating, developing, trialing, and then certainly commercializing any new products or emerging market opportunities that might have come across. As an electrical engineer, I provide the technical guidance for those new opportunities as we develop them. So today, just a bit of an agenda and some topics. First of all, I'm going to start with a bit of a disclaimer. I am not an FCAS expert or an SME. That's not what today's about. If we were doing a technical SME webinar, you would not have me presenting to you today. Instead, I've gone through a journey over the last few years where I led a project that connected a battery to the Queensland network and then registered that battery for FCAS. And I went from essentially zero knowledge about FCAS to understanding enough to complete that project. As I went through that, I obviously learned a lot about what it is that FCAS is, what are the markets, how does it work, what are the fundamentals that need to be understood both on a technical and a commercial sense. And as such, I've noted those down and I'm going to share those with you today. I do apologise if I say anything that maybe not 100% correct. And some of the content I'll present today is a little bit dated, given I prepared this presentation originally about 6 months ago. However, I would welcome any comments, feedback, or even during the session, but definitely afterwards. I'm always keen to learn and understand where I might have got things wrong. And then if you do have specific technical questions that you'd like to understand more that I'm not prepared to be able to answer because I'm not an SME, I do happen to know a few very smart individuals that work in this space, some of which may even be on the call today, which I would be happy to refer you on to. But to start things off, I'll talk about some of the fundamentals of frequency. So whilst I think most of you will understand on the call today, I want to assume zero knowledge, and as such, make sure we're on the same page when it comes to talking about frequency management and etc. I'll talk about some case studies that have occurred a couple of years ago now. I'll then dive into contingency FCAS, given this was the area of focus that I've worked through. I'll then look at a case study that was the one that I led, which is the Volley Plains BESS up in Townsville in Queensland. And lastly, I'll touch on sort of what my thoughts are for the future of FCAS, where it could go, and what those opportunities might present, such as vehicle to grid. Cool, so kicking off, frequency fundamentals. I don't think this will be news to any of you, but frequency is how fast something oscillates. In the context of an AC electricity network, our power systems, it's in reference to how often voltage cycles between the positive and negative of our alternating current system. In Australia, we operate a 50 hertz grid, which means that our frequency, our voltage oscillates 50 times every second. So hertz is a measure of per second, so 50 oscillations per second. However, there are other parts of the world that might be different to this. So particularly North America is 60 hertz. But effectively they operate in the same way, just with a different base reference frequency. So what does that mean for a power system and the grid? Well, I like to think of frequency within the power system about maintaining balance, or a measure of the balance that we have in our system. So when our system is perfectly balanced, then we should have exactly or close to a 50 hertz reference frequency measured across our entire network. The reality is, of course, as people turn the lights on and off, or load generations go up and down, clouds come across solar farms, etc., that the balance in our supply and demand shifts. And what this means for a network operator such as AEMO is that they need to be able to manage how this shifts to ensure that our network remains stable, because when it shifts too significantly, then the stability of our system is at risk. Within the standard ebbs and flows of supply and demand, AEMO, whilst always trying to maintain and regulate frequency to 50 hertz, accepts that within what they call the normal operating frequency band, that frequency will change and shift. So that frequency band is 49.85 hertz, so it's a 0.15 hertz less than 50, and then up to 50.15 hertz. So it's a 0.3 hertz band that they're happy to operate in before they start to consider, well, we've gone outside what is normal, we've gone outside what is expected and standard in the ebbs and flows of supply and demand in our network. Of course, AEMO is always trying to implement strategies that get us back to 50 and stay as close to 50 as possible, but that is not always possible. Particularly when we live in a country with a dramatic climate, we'll say, that likes to tear down our infrastructure, and there are unforeseen circumstances that occur and scenarios. For the most part, these scenarios are going to be non-forecast. They're going to be contingency events that occur that we weren't expecting to occur, that impact our network. On the first slide, where we have instability in terms of frequency falling, we have what's called an under-frequency event. Events like generator trips, through whether that's storm events or mechanical failures, etc., will cause the supply that we have available to us to drop. We'll have too much demand for the amount of supply that we have, and our frequency will drop as a result. If this continues to drop too far, then we run the risk of under-frequency events causing instability and complete blackouts potentially. The converse of this is, of course, an over-frequency event. So this is a scenario in which we have too much supply to meet the demand that we have. So the demand is oversupplied with generation, and as such, this pushes the frequency up over 50.15 if it's moving into a contingency event. Scenarios that may cause this would be things like an interconnected trip or some of the very large loads in our network. Queensland, for instance, Boyne Smelter, if it tripped off, I think we would certainly see an over-frequency event. However, I think that would be the least of the state's problems. Pretty sure they've got a direct line to the Premier. If we look at some of the case studies, and apologies, these aren't the most up-to-date, but they are still interesting and illustrative of the events that you see in the network that cause these sorts of behaviours and frequency. We turn to South Australia separation on the 12th of November in 2022. South Australia at the time, as it often does, was generating more energy than it needed to meet its demand, and as such was exporting that energy to Victoria, which was generating less than what it needed to meet its demand. A weather event was occurring at the time, which caused a fault on the 275 kV network, which ultimately resulted in a trip of that interconnector. And then all of a sudden, there was an excess of generation within the state, particularly thanks to the wind resources that exist there. And as such, you see a significant spike in frequency on the purple line there, and whilst on the Victoria side, whilst not significant, you do see a drop in frequency at the same time. This, given it raised above 50.15 hertz, is classed as an over-frequency contingency event, and actions were made at the time to ramp back generation, potentially even bring on load to arrest that frequency back down within the normal operating frequency band. The opposite of that, an event that we're probably all familiar with, it was certainly got a lot of media attention and was quite notable, particularly for those based in Queensland, was the Callide generator trip, which was on the 25th of May, 2021. This was a catastrophic failure of one of the generating units at Callide B, I believe, if I get that right, which caused not only that generator trip, but numerous others to go off in sympathy. You can see in the graph there, in the orange line is the frequency dropping down, decaying to the point that actually triggered what's called under-frequency load shedding. So there was a significant risk, I suppose, at the time of Queensland going black, and to avoid that occurrence, under-frequency load shedding protection schemes operated across the state, dropping load off statewide, traffic lights included, unfortunately, which helped arrest that decay in frequency and bring us back within the normal operating frequency band. So if we think of the mechanisms and the tools in the shed that AEMO and our power system has to manage frequency, the first and probably the most important one is inertia. And certainly a particularly key topic these days, given the declining amount of inertia that we have in our network. However, inertia is the natural tension and resistance of our large spinning generators to fight against those changes in frequency. You think of those of you who have a garden and do some, get out the whipper snipper on the weekend. When you try and take on a particularly thick piece of grass that slows down, it's that same mechanical impact where if the frequency is going up or down, that those large spinning generators will fight against it to bring it back to where it feels happy in terms of how it wants to spin. Where inertia is insufficient or isn't providing the response that's needed, then AMO relies on its primary and secondary frequency control mechanisms. So all generators, as of a rule change some years ago, must provide primary frequency response, or scheduled generators, sorry. And they are required to ramp up or ramp down their output in response to changes in frequency that they measure at the connection points that occur within the primary frequency response band. As you move beyond those first two tools or mechanisms to arrest frequency, you then move into what we call our frequency control ancillary services. So these are both markets that are offered by proponents. So markets that are offered by AMO, where proponents offer their services to help control and maintain and regulate the frequency within our power system. So the first one that would come into effect is the regulation FCAS. The concept of this is AMO would like to control assets that are offered to them to regulate frequency and match load with generation. So this is both generators and loads, controllable loads. And then when that mechanism is exhausted, they turn to contingency FCAS. So AMO will procure from the market the availability of generators or loads to provide a contingency FCAS response should there be a contingent event in our networks that needs a very fast or sometimes not as fast, but a response from additional generation or load services to help arrest it. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into contingency FCAS. There are a whole heap of other information and things that may be of interest to you about those other tools and mechanisms. However, the piece that I'm most experienced with and I dealt with the most with my project with the battery was the contingency FCAS. So I'll dive into that today. If you do want to know more, I'm happy to share direct you to some resources, some individuals on the other topics. So contingency FCAS is now offered through 8 markets. Used to be only 6, as of recently it's now 8. I'll touch on that in a moment. But effectively, you have your raise and lower. So raise is about increasing the frequency. So if you, in this scenario here, where we see the needle dropping towards 49 hertz, that would trigger a call of those providers that are offering raise services, wanting to push the frequency up. If it drops down, lower services then do the opposite. So as frequency gets too high, they offer their service to help bring it down, and that can be either increasing their load or reducing their generation to do so. Within the 8 markets, there are 4 time horizons. The first one being the very fast market, where a response is expected and required within 1 second of that frequency disturbance time, or that contingency event that has caused that frequency to drop below 49.85 in this example here on the right, or an over frequency event above 50.15. If the frequency event, like we see here on the right in the blue line, continues to keep, or frequency does not recover within that 1 second or that window of 1 to 6 seconds, then the fast market and those services that have bid in and available to respond in the fast market will then come online and provide their response within 6 seconds. And then as that contingent event continues all the way out to 10 minutes, the slow market comes in and provides their response by 60 seconds, and the delayed market vendors come in and provide their response by 5 minutes. So different technologies will be able to access different markets just by virtue of how quickly they can ramp up and provide their service as they have offered or bid into the market. In the scenario of, let's say, a battery, because that's what I know very well, if there is a under frequency event such as described here, where it drops down to 49.5 hertz, and that battery is available in all 4 of the raise markets, then that battery would be ramping up, providing its registered output by the time frequency reached 49.5, and then would be maintaining that output to meet the requirements to help arrest frequency throughout that full 10-minute window. As I mentioned before, there did used to be only 6 markets, and as of the 9th of October last year, the very fast contingency FCAS market did go live. This was on the back of some fast frequency response reform and consultation, which was kicked off in 2021, 2022, and ultimately went live last year. This market definitely takes advantage of the new technologies such as batteries, but it's not exclusive to them. Of course, if you have a different system, maybe a switch load that you can turn off within that second, then you could also definitely participate in these markets. But it's certainly aimed at trying to address the reducing system inertia that we find and arresting frequency decays or rises far quicker than maybe we have traditionally done. Cool. So why batteries? Why are batteries good or interested in FCAS? And there's a few different pieces around this. I'll start on the technical side of things. A battery, as most of you will know, is both a load and a generator. It charges from the grid and is a load. It discharges to the grid and can be a generator. It is also offers the opportunity as an inverter-based technology to respond extremely fast. It's a bit scary actually how fast it can push power in and out, and the impact that can potentially have, particularly on the HV or MV networks. As we transition towards a grid that is far more renewable, it has far less scheduled generators, not scheduled generators, far more intermittent generation sources. Energy storage is going to play a significant role in doing so and supporting that. And so having all this storage out there, it makes sense and would be very advantageous for it also then to be supporting the stability of our networks. And because it's an inverter-based technology and it can respond so fast, there is a commercial advantage in terms of being able to adjust its position. Vendors are able to adjust their position in the market to take advantage of market changes from a commercial sense, but then also on the network side of things, the stability side of things, the ability to increase and respond to those market changes to provide more or less FCAS service that's required. So there is a potential around optimizing and efficiency within the market as well. Can be fraught with some poor behavior, we'll say, from certain vendors. But that's something that the market and AMO are certainly trying to address. So on the opportunity side of things, I did touch on the revenue already, but it has been a significant opportunity for large-scale batteries and vendors and owners of them. Some examples here, and this is publicly available information, is that the Dalrymple battery has reported in its ARENA report generated over $22 million of revenue per annum in its first 2 years of operation purely through FCAS. It's a significant and attractive return on investment for that asset. I don't have data on others, or at least not that I can share, but certainly those early entrants into the market from a large-scale BESS certainly performed well commercially on their participation in contingency FCAS. One of the things that makes contingency FCAS so attractive to batteries technologies like batteries is that it is an availability market. So AMO procures the services of FCAS for that contingency. It's not expecting that contingency. In fact, none of us are hoping for it to occur, but it does need it to be sitting there and available in case that contingency does occur and to cover the position of the market in terms of what shortfall that might exist dependent on any of the credible contingencies that they are forecasting. So what that means for an asset like a battery is that it sits there and does not a lot for most of the time. We don't have that many big contingency events in our networks. It might be a dozen or so throughout the year across the NEM. And as a result, vendors and owners of BESS assets can feel a lot like they're getting paid to do not a lot. What's super important, however, is that when those contingency events do occur, that those assets that have made themselves available and getting paid for that available do actually respond. So we look at the risk, there are certainly large penalties and fines that apply for non-compliance or non-conforming bids. And some of the large batteries, particularly the early ones, have fallen foul of that. Not necessarily on purpose, but as a new technology, these things can be a bit uncertain. And so there's a story there around Hornsdale. I know a few of the other large battery assets have also failed to deliver or failed to offer conforming bids into the market at times. Batteries also offer the opportunity around aggregation. So we think I'm talking about large-scale batteries today, but the opportunity is also there to aggregate up a large number of smaller batteries, even residential batteries, and we see this particularly in South Australia, and orchestrate their behaviour or response together to respond and provide frequency control services through the contingency FCAS markets. There are some slightly different rules that apply to VPPs. I won't go into them today, but if you would like to know more, please do reach out. I'm happy to direct you towards the right documentation if you would like. Probably the other things that are worth noting on the risk side of stuff is that metering requirements are significant for AEMO to verify that the response that you have provided to an FCAS event. They need highly granular, very high quality metering data. This can be a point of contention, particularly in the aggregated participation through VPPs, because they, as an individual asset, are quite low cost, and applying a significant metering requirement to them can create a cost burden that doesn't make that an attractive option. However, AEMO have, with the latest version of the MAS, attempted to address many of those concerns with slightly different classifications for VPPs, etc. But for the larger assets, absolutely, they need to be providing and recording very good metering data. And probably the last thing, it's a bit of a curious one. I don't fully have an explanation, but FCAS capacity is capped dependent on the nameplate rating of your system. So if you're over 5 megawatt in terms of your battery or your asset that's participating, what you can actually bid into and offer into the market is capped at and it's tied to how quickly you're able or allowed to respond. So AEMO, from a system stability point of view, doesn't want everyone responding too quickly. In fact, they've had trials in the past where they've seen overly aggressive responses to frequency events causing, so an under frequency event, an overly aggressive response may cause an over frequency event, for instance. So there is an attempt to smooth that response somewhat. And as such, there is a limit to how fast you can respond, which happens to limit then the size and capacity that you can bid into the market or your system would be allowed to offer. Touching on a bit of a case study, I think we're going okay for time. Awesome. I just got a couple more slides and then we'll go to questions. This is just to give some perspective of what it did mean to register and participate in FCAS. And I say what it did mean because, as you can see here, the timeline ends towards the end of last year when this project, for me anyway, was closed out and I moved on. However, if I go back to 2019 and 2020, embarked through Yurika on a project to build and deliver the first grid-connected grid-scale battery in Queensland, in Bowley Plains in Townsville. It was a 4 megawatt, 8 megawatt hour BESS unit. It went live sometime in 2021 in terms of its participation in wholesale arbitrage and generally operating on the MV network there in Townsville. At that time, I started my journey of understanding contingency FCAS and going through the application process, the modelling, the testing, and then through to implementation and deployment, where we trialled our participation through a manual trading strategy to understand it a bit more, before ultimately procuring and going live with an auto bidding system with the asset, which bids the asset in automatically, without the need for regular manual intervention. And that sort of brings us through to today, where the asset is BAU automated bidding into FCAS and arbitrage markets. Some of the key insights or learnings for me. So if I think about the registration process, credit to AEMO on what they've put out there from documentation. Akhilesh, if he was on the call, I'd give you a shout out because what they've prepared through the mass and their documents is great. It is fairly clear and simple, and their engagement is excellent. Where it becomes more complex, at least my experience connecting to a distribution network, is that the impact on that local network can complicate and potentially present a barrier to how you provide all of the service you would like to provide in FCAS. And the reason for this is pretty simple. It's just how big that asset is sized compared to the network it's connecting. It would be the same if you were trying to connect a very, very large asset to a transmission line. However, we're connecting a 4 megawatt, 200 amp asset to a 11 kV line that's also 200 amps. It's 100% of the capacity of the line, so there are restrictions around when it can and can't operate as to not impact the development and local customers that you can see just in the back there. But that made it more complex and did present some barriers and a lot of convincing and learning with the network through that process. The DNSP does need to prioritise those potentially at times because whilst the broader system benefits might be there in terms of supporting system frequency, they don't want to see, they're unlikely to want to see that benefit ahead of the local stability, the local voltage impacts as well. And lastly, on the trading and then our operation in the market, auto bidding systems certainly help maximise that opportunity. But the foundations of them are having a good strategy and understanding how you want to take advantage with your asset. And you can't separate the commercial views from how it impacts the operational asset either. And so balancing those two can be complex, and there's plenty of consultants out there that probably make pretty good money helping owners optimize their participation and setting up those bidding platforms. And then lastly, just FCAS in general, the majority of revenue, contingency FCAS, sorry, the majority of revenue is often seen through just a few volatile events in the year, and not necessarily those contingency events either. So given it is an availability market, FCAS prices are high when there is a low availability. So if there are significant outages or generators out for maintenance, etc., that mean that there is a shortfall in supply of FCAS service, that drives the price. And so there'll be a few days in the year where that occurs for some reason. Sometimes it's contingencies, and assets like batteries that are available for that day will make the majority of their revenue on those days or those hours. Alrighty, just forecasting ahead. I'll just finish up in the last few minutes. And look, I haven't got any too much hard, fast comments or facts here, but given I've also now moved on into a space of EV charging, I certainly see a future for vehicle to grid capability to support or contribute to frequency management in Australia through FCAS markets. It certainly could present a potential revenue stream for EV fleet owners or even just residential customers through a VPP arrangement. Given as we move to V2G, you're thinking about participating with a 10 to 12 kilowatt hour battery in your home, and instead you're going to participate with a 60 to 120 kilowatt hour battery in your car. The opportunity is significant, but it will have implications on the infrastructure that we have and how we operate and how networks need to manage the risks that it presents to them. But I'm excited to see where that goes. Today, it's not really possible, I think is the simple answer. There's a study done at ANU in 2022, which found that whilst it may be capable under the existing standards to do lower services, it's currently not possible to offer raised services under particularly AS4777. Noting that I know a few people on the current working group for the updated AS4777, they're thinking about this all the time and looking to address this within the risk framework of the networks and the industries that they need to manage. But also other international standards like ISO 15118, I think it is. It's plug and charge vehicle it's known as the plug and charge standard for electric vehicles. It will also look to unlock some of this capability. And there'll be a few others that continue on in that vein. So I expect to see over the next couple of years, certainly vehicle to grid being a reality for just EV charging solutions in general. And then closely followed behind that, I would expect to see ancillary services potentially being provided through that. And I think that brings me to the end. So thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions on today's topic or anything in relation to my role at CIGRE or with Yurika and Energy Queensland. Maybe Kunj, is there any questions that have come through the teams? I'm not seeing them at the moment.
Yes, there is a question.
Fantastic.
Thomas is asking, how long does a battery need to sustain the power output response for in each market?
Cool. So let's go to this one. So this probably describes it best. In this example, it's 10 minutes because that frequency event hasn't recovered. It's stayed down. As you see the blue line, frequency is decayed to 49.5 and has continued to sit at 49.5. So an asset that is has bid and is enabled in all 4 markets of the RAISE service will need to sustain their output for up to 600 seconds. If we look at, so go back to, say, the Callide event, and a Callide event's a pretty long one actually, but you can see that the event occurred, you probably can't see, I'm sorry, but the event occurred at about 2:06 and 40 seconds, and were recovered by 2:07 and about 5 seconds. So it's about let's say it's a 30-second event. So what would be required from an asset that's providing FCAS is that they sustain their response whilst the frequency is below that 49.15 hertz normal operating frequency band limit. So once frequency is recovered, you no longer need to provide your response. That's my change. So if I go back to here, you can see in this graph here the lines of, if you are only providing response into the 1 second market, then you're tapering off your response by the 6 second mark, whilst the fast market vendor is coming on and making sure they're providing their response by 6 seconds, and then so on. I hope that helps answer the question.
Yep, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that question. Adrian, next question is, are customers with residential BESS currently able to participate in the FCAS market? Probably the last slide. Question from Madhura.
Cool. The answer is yes, they can today. So aggregated participation is available today. It's offered through typically aggregators. Some of them are retailers. Some of them offer specific aggregation services. So if you do have particularly if you have a household battery, there may be other ways to participate, but I'm not aware of them off the top of my head. But if you have a household battery and you sign up through that retailer or through the aggregation service, they effectively will take some form of control of your battery and bid it alongside many hundreds and thousands of other residential customers into the market, and then you'll get a revenue for that, for providing that service. So there are different commercial models out there, but absolutely is something that's offered today already.
There is another question from Stuart. You mentioned some vendors behave poorly during contingency FCAS. Is this a technical limitation or another issue?
Can you repeat that one for me one more time?
Sorry?
Can you repeat that one for me, sorry?
Sure. You mentioned some vendors behave poorly during contingency FCAS. Is this a technical limitation or is this another issue?
I'm trying to be careful. I probably shouldn't have said that anyway, but look, it can be a technical issue, absolutely. So if it can be a technical issue in how the control system is set up. So if that we're at the mercy sometimes of bugs or issues or coding glitches in our control systems. Inverter-based response to frequency is tied to a control system and a PLL loop and all those sorts of things. So where that configuration has gone wrong or isn't operating as expected, sometimes that's not found out until post. And so given we have large gaps in time between events, sometimes what you'll find is that an event occurs and the system doesn't respond as you expected. And then it turns out that for the last days, weeks, months, the system's actually not been set up correctly to respond. And that's where AEMO always takes the right to go back and say, well, those last 2 months of bids were actually non-conforming because your system wasn't set up to respond appropriately. AEMO does have what's called bidding in good faith rules as well. So assets that are bidding into any market should be doing so in good faith, and there are some guidelines around that. Sometimes for reasons that I'm not privy to, the vendors will choose to use those rules to their advantage. And as a new emerging technology, sometimes those rules aren't keeping up with the technology and the capability of that technology, and creates an opportunity for some vendors. But yeah. Are there any other questions?
There are questions I was just reading. There's another question is, being an inverter-based solution, was there any issues with voltage ride-through requirements?
Voltage ride-through. I think. So I'll address it more generally, and whilst I think about the voltage ride-through specifically, but absolutely there were issues with voltage. So for an asset of this size on a network of that size, as I mentioned earlier, it's effectively 100% of the capacity of that network. So its ability to impact the power quality and the voltage performance of that local network is significant. And so if you, in a scenario where the asset might operate very quickly and ramp up its export very, very fast, if that doesn't allow sufficient time or provide sufficient management of that voltage through reactive power compensation or other mechanisms, then it can have a detrimental impact on voltage at its connection point, absolutely. So there were scenarios in which the asset here in Townsville was not able to operate or not able to reach its full potential of providing FCAS because the impact on the local voltage would have been too detrimental, as according to the network, we'll say, and that because they got to manage that risk, and so because of that, potentially this asset and maybe others might be faced with the same issue is that it couldn't reach maybe its full potential around FCAS. So the rules that AEMO set allow this asset to be possibly more aggressive than it is in responding to frequency, but that would have had a detrimental impact on voltage. In terms of ride-through, I don't think it had a specific impact, but certainly voltage ride-through on this asset was something that when we went through the connection process originally was addressed in great detail. Hope that helps.
Not sure, but we can move into the next one. There are plenty of questions. The chat. The next question is, why is FCAS cap of less than half the nameplate for more than 5 megawatt plants, and why does not it apply to less than 5 megawatt plants?
So I can do that. So the reason why I can't say, because it's a rule that's been set by AEMO and the regulators. I understand the logic behind the reason that they do set it, and it's because of how fast you respond. So in order to provide your response, and I'll quickly go back to, let's say, this graph. AEMO sets a reference rate of change of frequency, or rock-off. So you may have heard of that. And that's this. That's the steepness of this decay here. So we see the blue line is decaying at 1 hertz per second, which is what they define as the expected rock-off for a very fast event. What that means is that you have 350 milliseconds to provide your full output for a frequency event that occurs that quickly. As an asset, you have a defined ramp rate, which will again be megawatts or per second. And so you'll have a defined amount of capability if you have a limit to how fast. So if you go to a ramp rate, the fastest possible ramp rate means that over those 350 milliseconds, you'll typically achieve approximately 50% of your nameplate capacity. I'm sorry, I don't have a graph to explain that well. It can be quite technical, but in general, it's because of the expected rock-off of frequency events, the limits on how quickly AEMO is asking vendors to respond to frequency, and you bring those things together, you end up with a limit of how much capacity you can actually provide in an FCAS event.
Yeah, it's really the fact that a lot of candidates coming
I hope that answers the question. Moving on to the next one.
Sorry, is someone clarifying or asking a question there?
G1 Gordon asked the previous question.
Okay, I just heard someone was speaking, so.
Maybe my background.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that. Jennifer is on the meeting. The next question is, will an imbalance in supply and demand produce a different effect if or when there are little or no spinning machines left in the network? Does any other parameter start to fluctuate instead of frequency?
Simple answer is yes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a different behavior response. I'll maybe talk to this one. So what inertia offers to our network from a frequency regulation point of view is the ability to slow down the decay. So in the Callide event trip on the right here, we have multiple contingencies that drop generation. So we see a decay. Without inertia, this decay you would expect to be faster because it's got nothing slowing it down. And the only way to arrest it is then to adjust that balance in supply. Inertia slows it down and possibly gives you more time to bring on, whether it's inverter based or otherwise, frequency response mechanisms. So as we continue to reduce the amount of inertia in our network, that would be a challenge. There's probably other challenges that I'm not possibly aware of or don't understand, and so I would defer to an expert in that area, but certainly that's one that I see. Cool. Another one.
Can't hear voice, maybe. It's very low.
Sorry?
Someone's speaking, but the voice is really, really low.
Oh, okay. Maybe if they did have comments or questions to send them through in the Teams.
Sure. Chat would be better. Meanwhile, just moving to the next one. What is the minimum megawatt size of the commercial battery to participate in FCAS market independently?
Yeah, so currently the FCAS market, I think the wholesale market as well, has a floor of 1 megawatt. So basically they handle bids in megawatt blocks. So you would have to be a sized 1 megawatt to participate directly in the market. And so those that are less than 1 megawatt would then need to participate through VPPs, aggregated portfolios.
Awesome. And the last one in the chat I have is, what are the specific frequency limits for initiating primary frequency control, secondary frequency control, and FCAS? In the slides, it seems FCAS starts when frequency is as low as 49.85 Hertz. Will the same 0.15 Hertz apply for over frequency FCAS?
So the second part of that question, yes. Off the top of my head, I don't know the primary frequency operating band. I'm sorry. It is published. So I'd suggest going to the AMO website and having a look at primary frequency response. It's very tight. I just can't remember what it is. I'm sorry. I knew I was going to get asked that question. I thought about writing it down, but I didn't. Sorry. But it's well within the what's the normal operating frequency band, which is at 49.85 to 50.15. Once you extend outside of that, then you're expecting FCAS, continuously FCAS responses.
Okay, we have dropped one more question from G1. Does the auto bidding rely on seeing the price during a 5-minute window? Any consequence for a BESS turning on and off during 5 minutes dispatch window for less than 5 megawatt generator or BESS?
I'm not sure I fully understand, but so absolutely, as with the wholesale market, FCAS markets operate in the 5-minute response periods. Can't think of the name of it. Sorry. Basically, so every 5 minutes there's a new window, and if you are enabled, then you have to be available for your full 5-minute window. So if an event occurs anytime within that window, you respond. So if you're dropping out halfway through, then AMO may consider that a non-conforming bid. I believe it's regardless of what size you are, but like I said, I'm not an expert in the market rules, etc. But certainly the way that I designed or set it up and then I believe it's continued to operate is to be available for those trading dispatch windows of 5 minutes at a time. And then there is a limit to how soon before a dispatch window that you can withdraw or change your bid. And it's seconds, but I can't remember what the number is. Oh,
Right. We have one more question.
yep.
Is there any incentive scheme for batteries to provide virtual inertia services such as Tesla's virtual synchronous generator mode at the wholesale power reserve?
There's no, to my knowledge to date, there is no inertia market, so you don't get direct, I guess, there's not a direct incentive for that. However, assets with virtual synchronous machine and that offer that virtual inertia service, to my understanding, can operate faster because they're not waiting to measure and respond. So that may provide them a greater access in terms of the capacity they could possibly provide into, say, the very fast market. Maybe that's a commercial incentive. I do know that this is a topic of consideration. So the regulators, the market operators, etc., are considering how they can encourage more of that. And ARENA has done some big projects to investigate more of what VSM can offer, what that means for our markets, and then to provide some guidance to rule changes that may be upcoming. But Nathan Crooks, who presented our last technical essentials and is a bit of an SME in VSM, etc., and grid forming inverters, might have a better answer for us. I'd be happy to connect you up with Nathan.
And Paulina has actually answered instead of question is primary frequency control band as of 8th of May 2023. It is 49.985 Hertz to 50.015 Hertz. So
Okay,
thanks,
cool.
Thanks, Paulina, for that.
I was going to say that, but it was going to be a guess. So please, someone posted. Thank you for that. And I think that brings us to the end of time. I'm sorry if there are other questions. But what I might suggest, if you did have questions, please reach out to me directly. And particularly if you want to know more about joining the NGN, if you're not already a member, I'd love to see more members join up. Like I said, it's free if you're an individual or a collective member of CIGRE. Otherwise, shall we bring it to an end there, Kunj?
Yeah, all questions are covered. Anthony just shared a link with the AEMC documentation for incentive schemes, and I think that's all. That's all for the day. Thanks for the presentation,
Thank you very much.
Adrian.
Appreciate that all. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.